Being the relatively new country it is, much of what we enjoy here in the United States was either brought over from our distant relatives or at the very least inspired by the old world. This is certainly the case when it comes to beer. While the American craft beer boom ushered in a bevy of seemingly novel styles, when you really break it down, most are just spin-offs of styles that have been around for a long time. You're listening to the Brülosophy podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and this week I'm joined by contributor Steve Thanos to chat about the arguably tame, at least by today's standards, American porter, which began as a play on the porter that was popular in the UK well over a century ago. Yeah,
the American porter actually for me was sort of the gateway beer that I got into craft beer. Strangely enough, it was quickly like my favorite beer style.
Yeah.
I still enjoy them today. I wouldn't say they're my favorite anymore, but it's definitely a style that I appreciate and will go back to. Just went to order a porter actually a few weeks ago when I was at a neighborhood brewery, and it was fantastic. So I'm looking forward to talking about this.
Yeah, I have to imagine that your introduction to porter was sometime around the same time that I was introduced to it. I'll never forget my first experience with American porter. I didn't even know that's what it was at the time, but I was home for the Thanksgiving holiday and had turned 21 just a few months before. And this older friend of mine knew that I was getting into craft beer, so he brought over this 6-pack of Deschutes Brewing Black Butte Porter. Now, this was up in the Seattle area where Deschutes Brewing is widely available. Still to this day it is. It blew me away. So, it's just massively different than the pale lagers and IPAs that I had been obsessing with for the prior year. It just really opened my eyes to this delicious style and, in fact, to this kind of smattering of darker ales that we have available to us. And now, at this point, I've brewed many, many batches of American porter. I love the stuff, and I really look forward to chatting with you about it today, Steve, as well as how one brewed short and shoddy style turned out. All right, if you're a fan of this show and you would like to receive a reward for your support, please consider becoming a patron of Brülosophy over at patreon.com/Brülosophy, where you make a small pledge and receive rewards like access to unpublished contributor recipes, unique discounts at YakimaValleyHops.com, and an invitation to a monthly live Q&A session with somebody in the brewing world. Our guest for this month, July of 2025, is the executive director of the American Homebrewers Association, Julia Hertz. The AHA was founded back in 1978 and has been a huge advocate for homebrewing ever since. While, it saw record membership just a few years ago, things really started to change over the last few years, which led to the AHA parting ways with the Brewers Association recently. And Julia has been a huge part of this transition, just based on comments that we've received on prior episodes where we've shared our unabashed thoughts and opinions on all that's going on with the AHA. I thought it would be really cool for our patrons to finally get the chance to ask Julia their questions directly, and we are massively grateful to her and the AHA for making the time for us to be able to do this. If you'd like to be a part of this session, all you have to do is make a pledge of $3 or more over at patreon.com/Brülosophy by Saturday, July 26th, as Julia's going to be hanging out that Sunday, the 27th. And if you're looking for even more, just a few bucks more will qualify you for rewards like monthly hangouts with Brülosophy contributors and regular private consultation. We really do try to make your support and of what we're doing worthwhile. You can learn more about all of the rewards we offer for your support over at patreon.com/Brülosophy. Another really easy way to help us out is just by using the links found at brülosophy.com/support when you're doing your shopping online. Your experience doesn't change at all, and we get a really small kickback for the referral that helps us to cover some costs. Feedback is brought to you by Clawhammer Supply, who, in addition to having an awesome YouTube channel chock full of great brewing-related content, sell what we believe to be are some of the best electric brewing systems on the market. If you've been considering making the move from propane to electric, you owe it to yourself to at least check out what Clawhammer Supply has. Whether you're after a 120-volt 5-gallon system or something bigger like their powerful 240-volt 10-gallon unit, Clawhammer has got you covered. Learn more about everything they have to offer at clawhammersupply.com. And don't forget to let them know that you heard from them at Brülosophy while you're checking out. Listener Kevin Brand dropped us a note on Spotify after listening to our recent episode focused on the results from the 2025 General Homebrewer Survey. Kevin said, "I am one of those people that think brewing water matters. I add brewing salts to all my water, but I'm also one of those strange people that don't filter my water, just straight out of the tap. Not only does our water taste great, but I had Ward Labs test it, and there is not much in our water. So I put my source water into Brewfather and just add salts to reach a specific profile. Would it be better to filter and build it back up?" This. I have a feeling that you and I are going to have a fun little conversation about this, Steve, because I know you and I do things slightly differently. if you like the beer that you're making, my whole opinion is then you don't really have to change anything. That said, I spent years using unfiltered and unadjusted even water to brew with, and telling myself that I was happy with it. Some of my beers did really well in competition. Then I made some honest friends, and while they were quite complimentary of the beers that I was making, they started commenting about this, quote, house flavor that they were getting in a bunch of my beers. It's not even that it was necessarily a bad flavor, just kind of unique and consistently there. And if you're neurotic like I am, you don't want that kind of thing there because you want to emulate, at least in terms of quality, what the pros are putting out. And this flavor it wasn't something I'd tasted in anybody else's beer. So in discussing how I might go about removing this house flavor, the idea of water is where we all kind of settled. I started with mineral adjustments, which was absolutely great for emphasizing certain characteristics. I think I've spoken about that one a ton, but it didn't really remove this house flavor. And there was a minute there where I was convinced, oh, this is just my house flavor. Fine. But then one of my buddies suggested I add the tiniest amount of SMB, sodium metabisulfite, to my brewing water. I bought this stuff for cider making, so it was already sitting in my fridge anyways. He suggests I just add a little bit to the brewing water for my next batch, and lo and behold, that flavor was gone, completely gone. It has been gone since. Apparently, that tiny little amount of chlorine in my water, which I'm certain, unless you're using well water, chances are you've got at least some sort of a disinfectant in there, whether it's chloramines or chlorine. The tiniest amount in mine seemed to be the culprit for this house flavor, which I now can use as kind of a gauge, right? So I'm not going to guarantee that your beer is going to be better if you start doing more than what you're already doing, Kevin, but I would recommend at least trying out, sodium metabisulfite's so cheap. And if you're not filtering it, it's just more insurance that you're going to drop that chlorine or chloramine out of there. I don't know. What do you have to say, Steve?
I am with Kevin up to a certain point. So the water that I use for brewing has always been Lake Michigan water. It's really good. I for many years of my brewing career, home brewing career, I really have been interested in competitions, and I know that judges are always looking at things like water to kind of distinguish between, a good beer to an excellent beer.
Yeah.
And being conscious of that, I've always kind of focused on water, but never really hyper, focused on it, but just kind of kept it, at bay and paid attention to it. Speaking of judges, I once had a judge comment on a stout that I entered. It didn't win, didn't even place, but it scored really, really well. And he said, your water was impeccable.
And you did nothing to it, right?
I did absolutely nothing to it.
There you go.
And after I did that, I did a little bit of research, and everyone kept on saying, yeah, water from Lake Michigan is really good for dark beers. I don't know where I read that or where I heard that. Maybe I just kind of, put two and two together. I don't know. So moving forward, I do not do anything with my water other than filter it. I think I might have once or twice not filtered it for a dark beer, and it was fine. However, with that said, I do pay attention to what I include when I'm doing more hoppy beers, or like maybe like a standard like blonde ale or something like that.
Yeah.
Where I'm not going to really be able to hide behind anything. That's when I'm, I'll pull out the gypsum to add a little bit to that. I do filter the water, definitely. I use an RV hose. So all those things are kind of, important, at least in my opinion. But I really think it depends on the style that you're brewing, and it depends on the water that you have to start with. And I think we can run down this rabbit hole of what's best. And to a certain extent, I agree with Kevin. Like if you like it, that's fine. I think that if we're like an average home brewer who likes to have beers on tap and you're fine with that, okay. But just know that if you're entering competitions, now you're kind of entering another stage where you're competing with people who might take that extra step with their water. So you have to compensate for that, and you have to take that into consideration. So
yeah, I like how you broke it down into like, if you're brewing for yourself and you're happy with your beers, fine. If you start competing with it though, or you're sharing it with a more scrutinizing crew of people, then don't if they start commenting on something that may be associated with a water quality, then be open-minded to that. The truth is, I mean, like, I've had your beers, Steve. They're excellent. I've never picked up a water quality issue in the beers that I've had from you. I have a buddy who lives about 15 minutes west of me, and completely different water source. He has much harder water, which it sounds like you might as well. I don't know what the water makeup of Lake Michigan is, but so my buddy Sean, he's been on the show before. He doesn't really do much with his water, and he makes excellent beer. I mean, every beer he makes is so good, and we're talking IPA, Pilsner, dark beers, and he's not doing much with his hard water at all. So it could also be that elements of technique and the approach. So just pay attention to that stuff. The reason I recommend trying, something like SMB if you're not going to filter your water is because it will absolutely knock out those disinfectants that we know cause that kind of chlorophenol flavor, which I didn't even realize. I say this all the time about off flavors. Most people will talk a big game with off flavors and think they can pick it all up. I think most people haven't even actually tasted it in a real beer for the most part. I now know what the chlorophenol flavor in my beers tasted like, at least if we were correct about our prediction about the chlorine. So you can buy, a half pound of powdered SMB from More Beer. I think it's like $5. I mean, you're going to have it forever. You don't use much of it. We're talking like half a gram for a 5-gallon batch of beer in the full volume of water. So just an idea. But if you're happy with your beers, Kevin, obviously that's what matters the most. If you start competing and getting kind of some feedback about certain characteristics that you didn't know were there, maybe you want to do something with your water. It can make a big difference. So if you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brulosophy.com or leave us a note on social media. When we return from this break, our focus will be on American Porter. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts.
We all know that designing recipes is really fun, and doing it well is so much easier with good software. We at Brülosophy recently made the switch to Brewfather, and honestly, y'all, we could not be happier. Brewfather utilizes the latest technology to bring you the most robust cloud-based recipe design software that can be accessed anywhere, on your phone, tablet, desktop, and even offline. It also works seamlessly with numerous third-party devices to make it easier to monitor every step of your brew. I know change can be difficult, but trust me when I say you need to go to brewfather.app today to try it out for yourself. That's brewfather.app.
So a few years back, I had the opportunity to visit the United Kingdom, and at one point I was at a pub with some folks, and one of them made a comment. You've probably heard this before, Steve. He said, "This pub is older than your entire country." I forget which exact pub we were at, but he wasn't kidding. I looked into it. They had stuff on the walls, it's wild to think that what we're doing here in the United States, as much as most of us who were born here just feel like this place has been around forever. It's kind of that sentiment. But the reality is beer and particularly English and German and Belgian styles of beer have been around for way longer than anybody in the United States was producing what we call beer today. And what the cool thing about this pub is that they were producing, in addition to some modern stuff, they were producing a line of classic British ales they've been brewing for longer than this country has been around. And one of those was porter. Now, in thinking about some of the history of American porter, you cannot go there without first talking about the history of porter in general, which was developed in England sometime around the early 18th century. This is just based on my cursory research and what I've heard over the last couple of decades about this style. But it came out of London. It was called porter because it was served to the people down at the port who worked at the port as a sort of hoppier and aged version of what was the popular brown beer at the time. So you had this beer that wasn't too high in alcohol. It had a little bit more hop character. It was a bit darker, maybe a little aged character on it compared to this brown beer that was around. But it was served to the hard workers, who were moving stuff at the ports. Kind of a cool, romantic image, Well, as these Europeans began immigrating to the new nation of the United States, they brought with them these brewing traditions, and porter began to pick up steam over here. Now, it's said, I thought this was kind of a neat point, that our very first president of the United States, George Washington, was such a fan of porter, and he actually got it. His favorite porter apparently was made by Robert Hare's Brewery out of Philadelphia, that he actually ordered it to be available at Mount Vernon, at the Mount Vernon estate, which I'd never heard that until I was doing research for this episode. Is that something you're aware of?
I did come across that actually in my looking at different things years and years ago when I was writing for a different blog, and it matches up. I did fact check it, and it's a fun thing to think about that.
It's so cool.
A U.S. president is so enamored with a certain beer style that he has to have it, somewhere on his estate. And I mean, hey, you're a president, you can make these things happen. So, why not?
Yeah. It's so cool. And when you think about historical porter, I'm remembering an episode of old Brewing TV. Chip Walton, before Chop and Brew was a thing, was doing Brewing TV for Northern Brewer. And I believe they did an episode where they actually brewed like a 1700s, like an 18th century version of porter from a recipe that they found. And it's quite a bit different than the porter that we see today, particularly if we're talking about American porter. So at that time, you have to remember that much of the porter that was available in the United States was either imported from the UK, or it was, British brewers or British inspired brewers over here in the US just kind of copying what they were doing over in the United Kingdom. And following the Revolutionary War, you got to think about this. Tariffs, what are those? On imported goods motivated American brewers to produce their own using local ingredients. And this really is, from my reading, this is kind of when the American porter started to kind of diverge from what we had just been calling porter, or what we now call English porter, was around this time when these brewers in America didn't want to have to pay these exorbitant fees. The businesses pay that. No, the people pay that. That's right. They didn't want to pay the tariffs to import all of these goods. And so what they did is just started sourcing material here in the United States, maybe up in Canada, and using those to produce their new versions of porter. Now, up until the mid to late 20th century, most of the porter stateside were just kind of emulating English porter, but that really changed. You had the differences in ingredients, which is going to make a small difference, and you have different brewers, different mindsets. But really where it started to change, as you might imagine, was when the craft beer movement kind of became a thing in the mid 70s or so here in the United States. These curious brewers just started putting their own unique spins on this classic style, and that ultimately culminated into what we now know today as American porter.
Yeah, I mean, I love the history of beer, and I've talked about this so many times already, and just the emulating the beers that have come from overseas, and then brewers coming over here after spending years overseas brewing, and they'll put their own spin on things. And a lot of times it's similar. A lot of times they kind of forge a new way of doing it. So it's interesting to think about like how the genesis of this style, and then kind of seeing where it's come, and how far it's changed over the years.
Yeah, and there's so many styles we could pick on. IPA, everybody knows the story of IPA. You taste a modern IPA today, especially a hazy one, and then you taste that next to an old school English IPA. They are different beers. You taste an American porter, next to an English porter. They are different beers. And I feel very fortunate for that because of the fact that we have more options, more variety now, and they might look a little bit similar. They might have been inspired by the same ideas, but they are different. And that's really cool to me too. So the BJCP provides this as the overall impression of American Porter, a malty, bitter, and often somewhat hoppy dark beer with a balanced roasted and frequently chocolatey character. That is quite a bit different. I mean, a somewhat hoppy dark beer. We're not saying this is a black IPA, of course, but compared to an English porter, you're not getting that American hop character. We're going to get into ingredients here in a minute, but it is just, to me, it's so much richer and fuller, like fuller bodied. And it does have that stronger malt character, but it's balanced by a stronger hop character. Whereas English porter is almost, even for its color, just this refreshing kind of easy drinking, you can knock a few back and not feel full. Whereas to me, American porter definitely, I think it's what people are referring to when they say that Guinness is like lunch. No. American porter is far more lunch-like to me than, stout.
It almost, just hearing you talk about this almost makes me feel like it is like the quintessential American beer, right? The American porter, in comparing it and juxtaposing it to the English porter, where it's, in America, everything is big. Everything is, what was the McDonald's thing? Biggie size it or something like that. But it just seems like it's such the American way of doing it. Make it bigger, make it better.
Yeah.
Quote unquote.
Go bigger, go home. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And just this whole notion that, we can outdo them and we can do it this way. I think at certain times I would prefer the English version of it, but at certain times a hefty American porter or stout or whatever would actually be good too. So to each their own.
To each their own. And to me, the fact that we have this variety is to take your pick, man. Drink the one you want to drink. And I just think that's so rad. I tend to prefer American porter. It like you, it was one of those defining beer styles for me. I don't talk about it very often, but back in the early 2000s, you couldn't go to a pub without seeing a porter or an amber ale. I mean, and of course an IPA, but we're talking the IPAs even just 25 years ago, massively different than what we're drinking today, at least up in the Pacific Northwest, to the point I've heard people refer to those styles of beers, the really sharply bitter and piney, as being Pacific Northwest IPA. It's just different than what they're making, what they were making down here at like Lagunitas and Russian River and stuff, versus what they were making on the East Coast, which was much more malty, or Midwest like you. So it's kind of this, I feel like American porter was just this thing that it was a craft beer defined style. And we're going to go over some of the characteristics of this. I'm going to blast through them real quick. Appearance, we all know what a porter looks like: medium brown to very dark brown, often with ruby or garnet highlights. It can approach black in color. Clarity, you want it to be clear. Even if the beer is so dark that it's opaque, if you hold it up, you don't want to see murky, muddy looking beer. It's supposed to be fairly clear, nice, and that yeast is nice and dropped out, and you got a nice full tan head with moderately good retention. That to me is like a pretty simple but understandable description of American porter in terms of appearance.
Very much so. Yeah. I mean, you do want to hold it up to the light. You want to be able to see that those reddish hues. If I want to go George Costanza on you and talk about that. But yeah, that's exactly what we're looking for.
Yep. And then for aroma and flavor, you're not looking at too many differences. I'll go with the aroma descriptors first. You're looking for medium light to medium strong roast aroma. It can have chocolate, light coffee, or lightly burnt notes with background of caramel or toffee sweetness, or like a malty richness. Low to high resinous, earthy, or floral hops. Keep that in mind. That's a little bit different than what you would expect to hear from an English porter with the types of hops that they're using. Moderate fruity esters are optional, and that is going to come into play when it comes to yeast selection. It should not smell sharp, acrid, or acidic. And the malt hop balance can vary, but it should always have a roasted malt aroma. In terms of flavor, like I said, very similar. Moderately strong roasted flavor, often with chocolate and lightly burnt character, sometimes with a supportive, sweet, caramel or malty richness, medium to high bitterness with a dry to medium to sweet finish. You do not want it to be cloying, of course, or acrid. You don't want burnt. You don't want it to be harsh. There can be low to high resinous, earthy, or floral hops that don't really clash with the malt, but there are dry hopped versions of American Porter that can be a bit more resinous or have kind of that fresh hop flavor. Moderate fruity esters, like the aroma, are optional, and then it should have no acidic bite. I mean, again, it just be a smooth, kind of chocolatey, coffee-like, easy drinking, creamy type of beer, in my opinion.
Exactly. Yeah. And one that just goes down easy. Might catch up with you a little bit if it's, approaching 7 or 8%. You'll have to be careful with that. But yeah, I mean, it's an easy drinking beer, I think.
Yeah. And just the last note on mouthfeel. I mean, you're looking for medium to medium full body. You keep that in mind when you look at English porter. When you drink an English porter, I'm in the like low to medium, maybe solid medium body for an English porter, but they also tend to have lower ABV. When you're making these beers that are pushing 1065, 1070 OG, just the sheer amount of malt that you use to get it up there is going to contribute to that body and that mouthfeel. So moderately low to moderately high carbonation. Stronger versions can have some alcohol warmth. The vital stats here, we're going to get to that in a sec, but 1070 OG, you're not going to, if you're getting alcohol warmth at a 1070 OG beer, I would think that there's probably something with your fermentation you got to keep your eye on. But so I wouldn't expect that in this style, but I could see, if you're doing a little bit something different, maybe pushing it to like 1080, like an imperial porter, then yeah, a little bit of that warmth is going to be perfectly acceptable. And then slight astringency from the dark malt is okay as long as it's just not too strong.
Right. Yeah. I mean, back to the mouthfeel, I've always found that English porters were a little bit thinner than American porters, and I think you hit the nail on the head about the amount of grain that we're using in American porters are so much more, and that you can't help but get that body from that, and it's definitely, you can definitely tell a difference. I think that was the biggest critique of people who don't like porters, like, oh, it's too thin, that's too thin. Well, that's because they're drinking, beers that maybe are like 3 or 4%. Yeah, of course it's going to be a little thinner.
Yeah, exactly.
Makes sense.
You expect that. Yeah, you expect that from a low strength beer. American Porter is definitely not low strength, though. According to the BJCP, the ABV range is anywhere from 4.8 to 6.5%. They give a range for the OG of 1050 to 1070, with 1012 and 1018 being the final gravity range. So that kind of gets you into that 4.8 to 6.5%. Back to my point about the alcohol warmth, I've had 6.5% ABV beers that seem to have that kind of alcohol warmth, but they also seem to have other issues. So it's not difficult to make a 6.5%, even 7% ABV beer that doesn't have that characteristic. At least in my experience, if you go to a good brewery and you order a double IPA, I don't get much alcohol warmth from that. No. And those are pushing, 8% alcohol. So right. Just something to keep in mind. I thought that was an odd thing that the BJCP included, but they did, and that's okay. In terms of IBU, you're looking between 25 to 50 IBU. Again, you're trying to balance that malt sweetness. So that's something you need to keep an eye on when you're designing your recipes, is where that final, IBU is falling relative to your gravity units. So SRM 22 to 40, that's that nice brown up all the way up to almost black in terms of color.
Yeah, I mean, the IBUs, it does surprise me that it's up to 50. But I mean, that balance that you're looking for with that grain, I think it does make sense. There was a beer that actually they still produce it today from Three Floyds out in Munster, Indiana. They came out with a seasonal Christmas beer called Alpha Claus, which was a very, very hoppy porter that they make, and it is one of their better beers, I think, in my opinion. And I tried to emulate that years ago. And I really tried to push the IBU. That was just back when, pushing the IBU limit was popular and, it was a thing. And I did research later on, years later, oh yeah, so that was just a big waste of money. Because the so human palate doesn't really, acknowledge or recognize anything over 100 IBUs, right? And this one was like well over 200 IBUs. I don't even want to know how many hops I used in that recipe, but I can remember sitting with my neighbor out and toasting the truck. The snow plows one time during a snowstorm, and we had a day off of work, and it was a snow day, and we were drinking out of the plastic cups and cheering the snowplow guy. So
heck yeah,
good times in the Midwest with snow and hoppy porters.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah. I would love to try that beer sometime. I've heard of it. I didn't know that's what it was called, but yeah, I've heard good things about it as well. And God, I'll never forget what I believe I've heard it referred to as the IBU Wars. My very first all grain, I did exactly that. This was back in 2010, and it was an abysmal IPA. They're so bitter, and even though you might not be able to perceive differences above 100 IBU. You can certainly taste the 100 IBU. And I don't know why we were doing that, but that's that Pacific Northwest thing.
Yeah.
So weird. But back to American Porter, characteristic ingredients. This is fairly basic again. For malt and grains, you're looking at pale base malt. This can be anything from like pale 2-row. You could use 6-row if you wanted, Maris Otter, Golden Promise, even though it is an American style. I know a lot of people who still prefer to use a bit more characterful of a base malt like Maris Otter or Golden Promise. There's usually going to be a little bit of crystal malt in there, some dark grains, typically chocolate malt and or black malt. This is not necessarily a style that you're going to see like roasted barley used in, which is an unmalted grain. And a little tip that I heard from somebody when we talked about the appearance of an American porter, one of the things we noted was that the foam tends to be quite tan, and it is. Every time I make one, it's pretty tan. Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know how true this is, though I feel like it's pretty true because I've kind of seen it with my own two eyes. If you're using black malt, chocolate malt, stuff like that, it will contribute, it will color the foam.
Yes.
But for whatever reason, roasted barley doesn't seem to do that. And so if you pour a Irish stout or something that you just used roasted barley in, that cap of foam is going to be almost white compared to that tan color of an American porter. So that's just one kind of curious little trick for pointing that out.
I've heard that too. So I'm reading behind your shoulder. I did hear that before too. And I would like to add that for base malt, I've had good luck with using either Vienna or Munich as a base malt for a porter or a stout, any kind of dark beers. And even Muttons came out with a mild malt, I believe it's called. Which works wonders for darker beers. So, if you have some of that laying around and you need to get rid of it or whatever, I would not hesitate to use that as well.
Yeah, no, I love that you brought up Munich and Vienna malts. I feel like they are like people have these weird opinions about them. I still hear them referred to as specialty malts. They are not. They are base malts. Vienna, honestly, is not that far off from standard base malts that we're using nowadays. Give it a go. One of the best American porter recipes that I've got, it actually scored like a 44 in a local competition, was made with like 15% Munich and 50% Vienna malt. And I think that I got that idea from you years ago, Steve.
Yeah.
You had mentioned it after we published an experiment or something, and that you're all you're doing is adding malt character at that point. And so if those characteristics meld well with the other stuff that you're doing for that American porter, then by all means give it a go. I think you might be surprised. In terms of hops, you're looking for a high alpha American hop for bittering. So, I mean, we say American, it could be Magnum or, Challenger if you wanted to stick with the English stuff. But, you could use some Simcoe, some Centennial, anything that has that higher alpha so you're not throwing a whole bunch of hops at the start of the boil. And then to finish up, you're going to use classic American or British hops, which I think is kind of cool that the BJCP acknowledged that even in this American porter, it's perfectly acceptable to use classic English hops. So East Kent Goldings, Fuggles, stuff like that. But I think for the more American ones that they're referring to would be things like Cluster, Willamette, Cascade. Some of the best American porter that I've had was made with Amarillo and Centennial. I didn't make it. A buddy of mine did. And you would think, oh, that's going to be a fruit bomb. Not when you brew right. When you use those hops properly, you're not adding this crazy fruit character. You're adding this nuance, and it really contributes, in my opinion, to just that full flavored characteristic of a good American porter.
I once did a barrel aged imperial stout with some friends, and it was, I think the IBUs on that one was like about 70, 75, and we added a shit ton of Cascade to it. And it was such a wonderful beer, and you could definitely taste the Cascade kind of in the middle after the roastiness kind of melted out a little bit, and you just get that hoppiness, and it was such a fantastic beer that we brewed. But yeah, I mean, you don't expect something to have that much hops, a style like that, but it's there, and it needs to be there because you're using so much malt, and it's going to be so cloyingly sweet otherwise. So yeah, it really does balance it out.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. So in terms of yeast, you can use any clean fermenting American or English strain. You have to put a caveat because English strains are just kind of widely viewed as, contributing ester characters. In my opinion, the esters that you get from them are most notable in paler styles. It's kind of hard to taste those through the hops and through, roasted grains, but they do, in my opinion, have their own unique contributions. And when I'm making an American porter, my go-to is the Fuller strain, Imperial Yeast A09 Pub, also Y Yeast 1968, I believe WLP 002 English Ale. All originated from Fuller's, and that's an excellent strain for this style. If you wanted to go with something more American, you could go with Chico. You could go, that's the, Safel US05, A07 Flagship, WLP 001, stuff like that. You could go with any of the number of available clean American strains, and mess around with a little bit. As long as you're not using Belgian yeast or anything like that, you should be good, because really what you're trying to emphasize in this beer is that roast character. And so as long as nothing's getting in the way of that or distracting you from it, then you're good to go. And then, we'll probably talk about this later, but American Porter is a perfect style for messing around with different adjuncts and flavorings and stuff like that. I believe Denny Kahn has like an Imperial Bourbon Porter that he makes. My brother made a maple porter one time that he sent me, and it was absolutely delicious. I didn't really taste the maple that much, but the beer was still good. There's people out there who regularly put brown sugar or molasses into their porter. There's no end to what you can mess around with when it comes to this style.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's to me, it always is like kind of the offshoot of the Imperial Stout and those beers that we see around like Christmas time with the big adjuncts thrown into it, like maple syrup, like you said, brown sugar, coconut, anything like that. I think people will, go crazy over. And I'm more partial to something a little bit more tamer, and kind of going back to the malt, using some rye, of course, no big surprise. I love some rye. In a porter, my rye porter once that I brewed, fantastic beer. I really loved it. So, big fan of that.
Yeah, one of my favorite adjunct beers of all time, my buddy Wes made it 15 years ago. Coconut porter. Oh my God. I absolutely love one of my favorite candies is Almond Joy or Mounds.
Yeah.
I think I told my mess up story recently about trying to make an Almond Joy beer that did not work out. But I just love coconut, and I love the blend of coconut and chocolate. And you put toasted coconut in a regular American porter, and my goodness, it's so good. So just a ton of adjuncts you can do, and most people aren't even going to scoff at it. Now let's just go over the brewing process. The common traditional brewing process for this one is not very difficult. It's an English based beer. That's where we got our inspiration. And as most beers like that, they're not that convoluted, at least when you compare it to places like Germany, where they were going through all of these different mash steps and such. So water chemistry, you're looking for balanced to slightly higher chloride to sulfate ratio, just to emphasize that malt character, a pretty common approach to water adjustments when you're making dark beers. If you are concerned with mash pH, pH, you're going to be looking at potentially having to kind of bump up the alkalinity of your water because of the fact that those roasted grains, which you're using a pretty hefty dose of, are going to pull that pH down a little bit. So just something to keep in mind if you're concerned with that. Typical single infusion mash at a fairly low temperature, maybe 150 to 152 F or 66 to 67 C, just to encourage that nice attenuation. You don't want this beer to finish too high for fear that, those residual sugars will be perceptible, which I've yet to be able to find, but you want it to finish at a relatively low FG. Again, 60-minute boil just to achieve good isomerization from those alpha acids for bitterness, and then to reduce the risk of the DMS. 60 minutes is what they say you got to do, and then you're going to quickly chill the wort to ensure a good cold break, and then rack as little of that trub as possible over to the fermenter. When you're making an American porter, what do you typically ferment it at, Steve?
Typically around 66, anywhere from 66 to 70 Fahrenheit, which is 19 to 21 Celsius, which is pretty basic for my ales that I brew. So nothing too out of the ordinary.
I'm the same way. 66 to 68 is where I'm going with it. I know some people who ferment their American porter, perfectly acceptable, by the way, with those English ale yeasts, and they'll push it up to 70 degrees or so just to try to coax out some of those kind of perry esters that can really meld well with American hops. So, but nothing crazy there. Your typical ale fermentation temperature. When fermentation is complete, you're going to do what you can to ensure that beer is clear going into the keg, and then you're going to carbonate it up to anywhere from 2.0 to 2.3 volumes of CO2. It's a little bit lower than many American styles out there, particularly American lagers or IPA, which I think a lot of us have sort of grown accustomed to having a nice spritzy beer when it comes to those styles. American porter, again, kind of paying homage to that older, the old world approach to brewing and serving, can be a little bit lower CO2. And that's cool too. I still push mine to about 2.3 to 2.5 volumes because I like carbonation. That's just me.
I do too. I'm a big fan of that. Even though I do recognize that maybe it's not everyone's cup of tea, pun intended. And I also am a big fan of porter styles being on nitro. If you have a nitro hookup with your gas tank, by all means, I think a nitro porter would be awesome. So that's something to think about.
I've had it before. Yeah,
I haven't, but I can just imagine that being really, really good. So
it really emphasizes the chocolate in my experience, like this dark chocolate. Oh, it's so good, man! It sounds delicious right now.
It does.
So I know. What are we looking for in a good example of American porter? You want it to be roasty without tasting like an ashtray, malty without being cloyingly sweet, hoppy without being a black IPA, luscious mouthfeel without being sticky or astringent. I mean, it really does strike this balance, in my opinion, in my experience, of just, it's not too much and it's not too little, but it's just got the right amount of all of that stuff. And it is a beautiful, beautiful beer. If you would like to try some commercial examples of American porter, you can look for things like Deschutes Black Butte Porter, which is still available. They make a non-alcoholic version nowadays, I've seen on the shelves. But Black Butte is probably, to this day, still my favorite porter of all time. Sierra Nevada Porter is a good one. Smutty Nose, if you live out on the East or Midwest, I believe you guys can get Smutty Nose Robust Porter.
Yep.
Very delicious. Bell's Porter is another good one. I've had all of these. And then Great Lakes Edmund Fitzgerald Porter as well. I've had that a couple of times. All great examples listed by the BJCP there. And you could probably, if you're friends with the brewer at your local, brew pub, go in and request a porter for a one-off at some point. They'll probably be excited to make it, It likely won't be the biggest batch because not many people are walking in and ordering porter these days. But if you can't get it out, make your own. It's a delicious beer. Immediately upon returning home to Bellingham, Washington, after the very first time I tried Black Butte Porter back in 2002, I went to Boundary Bay Brewing and ordered a pint of the porter that they had on tap. I was equally as impressed. It was delicious. And it was only a few months later that I brewed my first batch of beer, and American Porter was brewed 2 batches later. That's how much I loved this style. It was my 3rd batch of beer I ever made. That was using extract and steeping grains, of course. So once I switched to all grain and started designing my own recipes, I was brewing several batches of porter, every year, most of them done using relatively standard methods. How would one turn out using the short and shoddy approach? Well, contributor Ryan Hansen wanted to see for himself and brewed on up that he served to blind tasters for evaluation. Those results when we're back from this break. There's no denying that stainless steel is the best material for brewing equipment, and Delta Brewing Systems offers some of the lowest prices on high-quality stainless gear, like the Firm Tank, which in addition to holding 8 gallons or 30 liters of wort, comes with a domed lid to even further reduce the chances of a messy blow-off. Plus, it can hold up to 4 psi of pressure for closed transfers. Delta Brewing Systems also has their own line of brew kettles, as well as one of the lowest-priced all-in-one electric brewing systems out there, and their prices are shockingly low. If you're in the market for legit stainless gear that won't break the bank, do yourself a favor and head over to deltabrewingsystems.com today. Have you ever thought about adding a port to your kettle but held off because you didn't feel like drilling into your gear or sending it off to have someone else do it? From the makers of the world's fastest counterflow chiller, the Exchillerator, comes the Hangover, the easiest way to add extra ports to your kettle as well as countless other options. Mount a faucet to your keg for easy portable pouring. Set up the perfect whirlpool arm. Hold a heating element in place. All of this and so much more without permanently modifying your gear. Manufactured right here in the United States, the Hangover offers brewers too many convenient solutions to list here. So head over to Exchillerator.com today to see what the Hangover can do for you. When I first got into craft beer, there were nowhere near as many breweries as there are today, but it seemed one style they all had on tap was American Porter. Sadly, this does not seem to be the case today, though for those of us who still love the style and enjoy brewing, it does give us ample opportunity to explore variations on the style. That is exactly what past contributor Ryan Hansen did with his short and shoddy American Porter, which he brewed on his 120 volt clawhammer supply unit. I think that's pretty cool because it is a lower power system. And, a lot of the times when I started doing the whole short and shoddy thing, it was when I had higher power stuff. So to see people doing the same thing with these 120 volt systems is just so cool to me. He started this brew day at 9:56 in the morning by collecting the full volume of filtered tap water. So he did the same thing you and I are doing, Steve, in filtering his tap water. But then I think he typically makes adjustments. For this short and shoddy batch, he just left it alone. Now, just a little side note, I live very close to Ryan, especially in this new house, and we have excellent water. I could take the water that I have here right now and brew a batch on its own and not do anything to it, not even filter it. And I'm pretty confident it would come out tasting pretty good. I'm still going to do all the stuff I normally do because I'm a nerd, but just saying, I wasn't too concerned when he told me he was skipping mineral adjustments on this one. But something to keep in mind, we do have very soft water, and darker beers are known for doing well with harder water. So that was a concession that we made here.
Right.
So as for the grain bill, he used 81% pale malt, 13% C45, so crystal 45, 3% chocolate malt, and 3% black malt. What do you think about the balancing of the chocolate malt and the black malt like that?
I like it. I think I probably would have gone a little heavier for both. But yeah, I like it being equal. And I do like the fact that he added some crystal to it. As much as we all talk about within the group about my love for crystal or caramel malts, it does. It's kind of cool to see that. So yeah, I have no problem.
Yeah, no. So, and just again, another side note, he basically took a recipe that he's brewed many, many times. He has this great porter recipe that all of his friends are very well, they were all familiar with. And he basically just adjusted it to the short and shoddy thing, which means upping the pale malt a little bit to, to make up for this, at this point, his kind of expected hit to efficiency. So,
okay, that makes sense then.
Yeah, I had his regular American porter, not the short and shoddy one, many times. It's delicious. So even with just 6% roasted grains, I agree. Mine tend to have more than that, but it's pretty solid beer. So I was stoked to see that he was using that as inspiration. When his water was to strike temperature, the grains were added and stirred to incorporate before checking to ensure it was at the target mash temperature of 152 Fahrenheit or 67 C. That to me seems right on point with kind of where you want to be for this style. Not so low that you're just going to dry it out, but not so high that it's going to leave these residual long chain sugars.
Right. Yeah. Perfect temperature for it. Just seems like it's the right temperature to go for.
Yeah. So far, though, not much crazy. Here's where we start getting into the short and shoddy stuff. He mashed this mash for 30 minutes, after which he transferred the wort to a kettle and boiled it for just 30 minutes, adding 28 grams of CTZ, that's Columbus Tomahawk Zeus, at the 30-minute mark, so right at the start of the boil. And then 15 minutes on, he added 57 grams of Cascade. So you've got these two hop varieties, very American and known for contributing a stronger citrus character, but he's not overusing it. This is basically 3 ounces for the whole 5.5 gallon batch, which part of the reason he had to go with 28 grams at 30 minutes was because he needed to increase the bitterness, right? CTZ is a relatively high alpha hop, but if he were adding CTZ at 60 minutes, he probably would have used about half of what he did here. So is that, going to have some flavor carrying through? Probably.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you have to take that into consideration. I think that was the first thing that I learned when I was first started doing short and shoddy years ago, when I wasn't even a contributor, is you need to compensate for that first bittering hop that you add. So it makes sense. And the 57 grams of Cascade at 15 minutes, again, yeah, you're not going to get the huge flavor and aroma like you would with Cascade for say a pale ale or anything like that, because those roasty malts, the chocolate and the black malt is gonna take into consideration, and it's gonna make sure that it's not going to be overly citrusy, like you were saying.
Yeah.
So,
and here's the thing: the way that citrusy characteristic presents in a porter is going to be different than the way it presents in a pale ale. So it may be that it's there, but that it's melding with something else. So just things to keep in mind. So he boils this wort for 30 minutes, and when he's done, he runs it through his Accelerator Max counterflow chiller. This thing is a beast, and it got down, even here in warm Fresno, California, it got his wort down from boiling to 72 degrees Fahrenheit or 22 C within about 5 minutes. So just during transfer to his fermentation vessel, he takes a refractometer reading, shows the wort is at 1071 OG, which, come on, 64% brewhouse efficiency using the short and shoddy method. That is nothing to complain about. I feel like that was just, he's actually 1 point over what the BJCP says is kind of the cap for an American porter. We all know that that's loosey-goosey, but
right.
I mean, good job on this, in my opinion.
Definitely. And I'm wondering what the projected OG was in the beginning, like before he started brewing. If he's getting 64% brewhouse efficiency.
Yeah, I think so this was the first short and shoddy he did for Brülosophy, and I think what I told him, he was asking me, like, how should I adjust? You brew with the same water on basically the same system, what? And I just told him, set your regular 75% brewhouse efficiency down to 60%, and if you overshoot, then all the better. And it sounds like he barely did. It was 4% over that 60. But man, that's really awesome, especially considering the strength of this beer. I usually see, that there's this inverse correlation between the amount of grains I use and my OG going down. Mm-hmm. In this case, I just feel like you really nailed it. So I think that's pretty sweet. So this wort is sitting at 72 degrees Fahrenheit, 22 degrees C. And rather than pre-chilling it down to his fermentation temperature, he just pitched a pouch of Imperial Yeast AO9 Pub into this warmer wort and then connected it to his glycol chiller and set that glycol chiller to 68 degrees Fahrenheit, which, again, using AO9 Pub, that's probably, I'd be at 66 to 68, somewhere in there. He checks his watch, and it is 12:18 p.m. for a total brew day time of just 2 hours and 22 minutes. Mind you, this is on a 120 volt system. Mind blowing to me, because I would have presumed, again, I've done all of my short and shoddies either on strong natural gas or a 220 volt system or 240 volt system. the fact that he got away with this on a 120 is just so rad.
Yeah, I mean, my brew days are pretty short with brew in a bag. They're at around four hours, sometimes three and a half hours. So to shave that much time off of even that is phenomenal, I think. It would definitely make me happy.
Yeah, so he pitches that yeast, fermentation starts. He said it kicked off surprisingly quickly, but then after about 11 days, he noticed there's no signs of fermentation, so he takes a hydrometer measurement, and the beer had attenuated all the way down to 1012 FG. I mean, that is such a sweet spot for this style, in my opinion, for a total ABV of 7.7%. Let's go, right?
Oh, yeah.
That's so awesome. For American Porter, you kind of want that. In my opinion, that's what I'm expecting. I've had lower ABV American Porters. They can be very delicious, but I always enjoy the ones that are north of about 6.5% ABV or ABV, but not quite to 8% yet. So that kind of 1.5% range in there is where's kind of the sweet spot in my opinion. So the beer's obviously done fermenting. He cold crashes it down to 34 degrees Fahrenheit or 1 degree Celsius overnight, and then pressure transfers it to a CO2 purged keg that he places in his keezer. On gas, he burst carbonated it at 45 psi for 18 hours and then reduced that gas to serving pressure and just let it sit for one more week of cold conditioning before he just started sharing it with his buddies. Now, there was a lot there. Cold crashing, not a big deal. He does it under pressure. I mean, none of us want oxidized beer. So he cold crashed it under pressure, transfers it under pressure to a purged keg, but burst carbonates at 45 psi for 18 hours. There's some people out there who would say, man, all you're going to do is increase the carbonic bite of that beer. I have never experienced carbonic bite when I'm burst carbonating.
No, I haven't either.
Yeah, it's there. I mean, I've tasted carbonic bite when I'm making sparkling water, but I think that's just because there's nothing getting in the way of it. I've never really gotten in the beers and I'm also carbonating it way higher than I do beers. So, but I don't know. So anyways, he waits a week of cold conditioning, starts serving it to people. These are, short and shoddy beers are served to blind tasters, but by blind, we're just saying they don't know about the way we approached it. We do share with them the beer style and the BJCP description of that style, which we'll get to here in a minute. Now, before he started collecting data, Ryan went and kind of evaluated it for himself. And, he thought that it was a good beer. He said that because of the fact that he had brewed this beer many times, he sort of knew what to expect. Again, making just minor adjustments for the reduced mash and boil length. But he said this short and shoddy version tasted exactly the same as prior batches of his porter that he has made many times, which is to say that it was delicious. Caramel, chocolate, and roast flavors with just enough bitterness to keep the sweetness in check and hints of that Cascade hop character. I think that's so awesome that we finally got somebody who took a recipe that he's been brewing for years and years, cut out over 2 hours of time from the brewing process, and he thought it tasted exactly the same. I mean, pretty rad.
It is pretty rad. And considering that we both know kind of how meticulous Ryan is with brewing, I have to think that, he's going to be his own worst critic. And he's going to know, what exactly was different with this batch than, say, his full hour mash and hour long boil recipe. So I'm sure that he would pick that up, but there's actually no difference at all. So that's great.
No difference based on his memory. I mean, of course, he wasn't tasting them side by side.
Right.
And we've talked about integrating a series where we do short and shoddy and compare it to a non-short and shoddy batch, which we've done a couple of those, I think. In this case, I'm just taking him at his word. I also had the opportunity to drink this beer at his house, fresh off the tap, and it tasted like what his porter has always tasted like to me. Absolutely delicious. Just excellent style, an excellent version of the style that Ryan made. So, I'm right there with him. Now, obviously, we could be biased toward wanting to like this beer because we like the short and shoddy approach. So that's why we serve it to blind tasters. Real quick, we skipped over this. I didn't mean to. The appearance of this beer, it was dark brown, bordering on black. And it did have, if you held it up to the light, like to the sunlight, you could see this nice, just crystal clear ruby garnet highlight looking thing right in the corner of the glass. Creamy tan cap of foam sitting on the top of this beer. Absolutely beautiful. It looked exactly like I would expect. respect for an American porter. So nothing off in that respect either. And just to note, again, Ryan and I are drinking this beer. I think I had 3 pints. I was at his house for a couple of hours and just absolutely went down easy. 0 off flavors whatsoever. So as far as the two of us are concerned, this is a hell yeah. He did a good job. But again, serve it to blind tasters. We had an issue collecting data at this point. I think there was still some COVID stuff going on. So he only was able to tap 13 tasters who were able to come by his place. All of the participants again were informed of the style and asked to evaluate the beer based on both previous experience with American Porter as well as the provided BJCP description. So in terms of the average characteristic rating, how hoppy, malty, and dry the beer was, tasters rated malty as being the strongest characteristic with an average of about 3.2 out of 5. Ratings on dryness were second at around 3.1, so just under that the malty, which I thought was kind of interesting, while the hoppy characteristic got the lowest rating of about 2.1. I mean, overall, the order of those makes sense to me. I did not perceive this beer as being terribly dry, but some people do, and who are we to question that?
Exactly. Yeah, the order does make sense, just in terms of like what we expect from an American porter, though, right?
Yeah. And I feel like a lot of people these days, when we ask about the hoppy thing, they're looking for IPA hoppy. So they rate it extra low because it's not IPA, which that's okay. We can take that into account.
Yeah. That's how they're perceiving it.
That's exactly right. And understandably. But the other thing is that some people also rate perceived bitterness as hoppiness, which again is completely fair. I mean, you could argue that's exactly what it is. In this case, the beer was so well balanced that you didn't really get much overt bitterness. You just got a nice balanced chocolate flavored beer, right?
Right.
As opposed to it being overly sweet. And I think that can also reduce people's ratings on the hoppy scale. So, now, we ask tasters at this point to break down the specific characteristics they get from each the hop, malt, yeast. And so we're going to start with hop character. They said 6 out of 13 rated earthy as being the most prominent characteristic. 3 said it was pine and resinous. 2 went with berry, which surprised me. And then 1 each said spicy and dank/catty. Nobody endorsed fruity, floral, melon, or onion and garlic. This is always such an interesting one to me because my recollection of that beer, I would probably have gone floral, but nobody else would have. So I'm not sure what there's such subjectivity in evaluation. But yeah, what do you think about that?
I think that the earthy makes sense. And yeah, the berry kind of threw me off a little bit. And yeah, I would probably think that floral would be a little bit more recognized. But again, perception, it's just based on how people are drinking it, and they're not sitting down for hours drinking it and evaluating it either. It's a short amount of time in which they're doing it, so that needs to be taken into consideration too, I think.
Yeah, and I think a lot, we've never really gotten into this part of it, but when it comes to sensory evaluation, what we're really doing is making associations, whether it's with past experiences or with what we've been taught or whatever. And I think that can be kind of fickle sometimes. And I think that's why you see such inconsistency in these, though, 6 out of 13, that's a plurality. And then when we look at malt character, a majority actually said 7 out of 13, that roast was the most prominent malt character, which that makes sense. Another 4 went with toasty. Again, that is right in line with what I would expect. 1 each said nutty and chocolate. So 100% of tasters went with descriptors for the malt character that I think work very well with American Porter. Nobody said cracker, bread crust, or caramel sweet. Kind of interesting. I would have expected at least 1 or 2, to say each of those, but no, they went with more of that roasty thing, which makes sense. And then in terms of yeast or fermentation character, another 7 out of 13. So a majority said that it was a clean fermentation character. Mind you, he technically underpitched into warm wort, so you might expect there to be a really high esterification from that. 3 people did note esters as well, as 3 people noting that they got a phenolic character. Now, mind you, on the survey under phenolics, one of the things is like smoky burnt. And that's more like burnt plastic. That's just a descriptor that they use. A BJCP Grandmaster helped us develop this survey, and we took what she had to say and we put it in there. And I think some people get a little bit mixed up when you're serving them a roasted beer and they see that and they're like, well, obviously it's roasty, so let's say phenolics. But only 3 out of 13 said that. Nobody endorsed sulfur or wild. It all sounds in line to me.
Definitely, I totally agree. Especially clean. That's what it's supposed to be, and I would expect nothing else from Ryan in his brewing prowess, right?
His neurotic brewing prowess, which I can relate with the neurotic part of that at the very least. Oh, God. And so, okay, in terms of off flavors, we just asked tasters, hey, look, here's a list of all of the most common off flavors. We just stole it right from the BJCP score sheets, all of the off flavors on that one. And we say, do you identify any of these? They can select however many they want. Usually you have 1 or 2 people are the only 2 who endorse any off flavors, and they find like 15 in a beer. In this case, not a single person identified a single off flavor. And I did not evaluate this beer. Obviously, I knew how it was brewed, but I did drink it and talk about it with Ryan and another buddy of ours. And none of us got off flavors either. So that just adds a little bit, I guess, of anecdote to this data, that it really seems like the corners that Ryan cut in the making of this beer did not have this negative, perceptible impact on this American porter. And again, it's hard to accept. We've been doing this for almost a decade now, but I still would expect there to be something bad that comes from, bucking the traditional brewing ways. And in this case, that just didn't happen.
Well, maybe we need to start thinking differently about our expectations, and we've gotten to the point where, we have all this piles and piles of evidence. I mean, how many short and shotties have we brewed as Brülosophy so far? And, it's still, holding up. So maybe there's something there to it. I don't know.
Yeah, no. And I think what we're starting to see is a little bit of a softening of the hardcore rhetoric when it comes to sticking to, traditional ways.
Sure.
And I love to see what we're starting to see come off of that, though, is like, oh, with Pilsner, you can't ferment it warm. Well, unless you're fermenting it under pressure. We haven't been able to show that there's any difference when you ferment one warm under pressure versus warm not under pressure. So there's things like that. When it comes to beers like this, I think what you'll see is, oh, yeah, because, ingredients are just so much more improved than they were in the past. That may very well be the case. There's no way for us to know. We know that they've made improvements, but who knows if a beer 30 years ago brewed using this silly short and shoddy approach would have been bad or not. The reason I was inspired to do this series is because I would get anxious if I was 2 minutes off on my boil or, and I thought, let's just throw caution to the wind. And here we are, 65, 70 brew days later, or short and shoddy brews later. And very rarely have we come across a style that doesn't work out or didn't work out that well that we need to revisit. So the final 2 questions we ask are probably the 2 that most people are interested in. One of which is, how well does this American porter represent the style based on the BJCP description that we've provided? 5 out of 13 gave it a 5 out of 5, just saying that this nails the style. It is an American porter through and through. Another 7 rated it a 4 out of 5. So that right there is 12 out of the 13 people have given it either a 4 or a 5 out of 5. I don't say this often. I would have given it a 5 out of 5. American porter has a little bit of flexibility. They don't all have to taste exactly the same. This tasted like that classic American porter that I loved drinking at pubs back in the mid 2000s. Absolutely delicious. One person did rate it a 3 out of 5, but nobody rated it any lower than that. And I think that's pretty cool. This 2-hour brew day, 2.5-hour brew day with cleanup, he was able to produce this beer that people are saying, yeah, this is pretty damn good.
It's pretty awesome, and those numbers are really good. 12 out of 13 people giving it a 4 or 5. Numbers don't lie, right?
I mean, so that's what the people that's what the people thought. That's what they rated it. Now, our final question, it's a little bit different of a spin. We're not asking how well does it represent the style. We want to know how much you like this beer, and it is very subjective. We say, it could be somebody hates porter, so they're going to give it a 0. That's totally fine with us. In this case, out of the 13 people who evaluated this American porter, 7 of them, again, a majority, gave it a 5 out of 5. That's how much they liked it. So that means 2 people, presumably, who rated it lower than a 5 out of 5 on how well it represents a style, bumped up their preference rating because they just liked it so much. I think that's pretty cool. Another 5 people rated it a 4 out of 5, and then one person gave it a 3 out of 5. That's 100% of the tasters. Nobody rated it a 2 or lower out of 5. Again, really good, in my opinion, a really good sign that this beer hit the mark for an American porter.
Definitely. That's definitely, again, numbers don't lie. Sounds like a really, really good beer. One that I think everyone should brew if you're looking to brew a porter.
Yeah, it's funny because you and I started brewing, I don't know how long exactly you've been doing it, but I'm well over 20 years at this point since I brewed my first batch.
I'm at 11 years.
And back then, yeah, so you're at 11 years. So yeah, there are still those styles for you even, especially for me. I remember when we were, in the early 2000s, you would want to brew these beers that you didn't have access to. So old English porter, Belgian ales we always hear about homebrewers making Belgian ale because you couldn't really get good examples of it over here. What's crazy now, and porter was everywhere. I still brewed it because I wanted to see if I could match the breweries around there.
Oh yeah.
But it was at every pub you went to. Same with amber ale. Well, nowadays that's not the case. So we are the people who get to encourage the younger generation of brewers to try these out. If you haven't been able to get your hands on a solid classic American porter, make one for yourself. They are, and if you don't want to spend 4 or 5 hours brewing it, try the short and shoddy approach. It doesn't seem to be to have that negative of an impact, if any, at all. And this beer just turned out, I'm telling you, from my mouth to yours, I tasted this beer. It was excellent. There was no issues with it. The other thing, and this is what I'll kind of leave this one on, American porter is an excellent style for experimentation. I was talking about this a little bit earlier. Add fruit. I had a friend of mine who loves the melding of orange and chocolate, put some bitter orange peel in an American porter, and it just completely changed the beer.
Interesting.
It tasted like that orange chocolate candy, coconut. You can do so many cool things. You can put oaken a porter. You can add bourbon to it. You can do so many cool things. This is just a rad style, in my opinion, for that kind of stuff.
Yeah, definitely. If you're living where I am in the Midwest, get your hands on some Pollyanna's. I'm blanking on the name now. Eleanor is their American porter, and Revolution has a very popular porter called Eugene. Get those if you have access to it, and then get your inspiration. Brew American porter yourself, because it's a great style, and you'll enjoy it.
Couldn't agree more. I think our love of American porter, perhaps even mine more so than yours, came through in this episode.
For sure.
That does cover everything that we've got on American porter. If you haven't already, please go subscribe to the Brülosophy Show over at youtube.com/@thebrülosophy Show, where Martin is putting together some truly awesome brewing and beer content that we're confident you're going to love. And don't forget, you can click the link in the description of this episode to read all about this short and shoddy American porter. The Brülosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to Brülosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit Patreon.com/Brülosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brülosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it suits my bro. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman, no.